My name is Andrea Ray, and I have the pleasure to serve as the President CEO at the Seattle Southside Chamber. And on behalf of our board and staff, welcome to this King County vaccination webinar specifically tailored to hoteliers and event producers and promoters. This copyrighted webinar is presented by the Seattle Southside Chamber of Commerce and may not be reproduced or retransmitted in any form without the express written consent of the Chamber. Thank you again to our sponsors, Scott and Teresa Schaefer with South King Media. Again, tireless advocates for our community as a small business themselves. They are dedicated to helping other small businesses grow, as well as keeping our community connected and informed. Again, Scott is broadcasting this webinar live on Facebook and recording it so that even more people are able to experience this content later at their convenience. A couple just Zoom housekeeping things before we get started. This is a Zoom webinar. If you need technical assistance, please go ahead and use the chat box and staff will do our best to assist you with technical questions. However, if you have a question for our speakers, and I see many of you are already using that Q&A box, this will just help me as I get to moderating the questions at the end of the presentation, just keep better track of where we are with the questions. So again, questions, please use the Q&A function. And again, we do have live closed captioning for today's event, and you can turn those titles on or off and view the full transcript just by hitting the live transcript in your Zoom toolbar. Want to say a brief thank you to all of our partners that made today's event possible. Of course, the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce, the Seattle Southside Regional Tourism Authority, One Eastside Spark, Business Health Trust, and of course, King County. And now it's my honor to introduce Mark Everton, President and CEO of the Seattle Southside Regional Tourism Authority, who will welcome our speakers. Mark, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. And first, I hope also that everyone is healthy and safe. And as a destination marketing organization serving the second largest group of hotels in the state, we're doing all that we can do to ensure that our region is open and safe to welcome visitors, corporate travelers, and soon meetings and convention attendees. We're doing all we can to support the hospitality industry through these challenging times and are grateful for our amazing partnership with Andrea, with the Seattle Southside Chamber. The Southside Chamber's connections with the county and the business community has enabled us to provide this opportunity for our hoteliers to ask industry-specific questions to help guide their business operations to be as safe and as efficient as possible. Today, we're going to learn more about the King County vaccine requirements and the vaccine verification program and how that program will specifically impact hotels and event operations and how the programs are going to be enforced. To walk us through all of that, please welcome our speakers today, Shannon Braddock and Ingrid Olray. Shannon Braddock is the Deputy Chief of Staff to King County Executive Dow Constantine. She previously served as Council Relations Director and was the Chief of Staff for King County Council Member Joe McDermott from 2010 to 2015. And Ingrid Olray will also be joining us, and she's the Policy Director at Public Health, Seattle and King County, where she oversees teams working on maternal and child health, healthy aging, and behavioral health, and co-leads the department's COVID vaccine delivery strategy. Ingrid has more than 20 years of experience in healthcare policy and advocacy. Previously, she served as the advocacy director for the Washington State Office of AARP, and before that, senior policy analyst for the Service Employees International Union based in Washington, D.C. More than 5 years living and working in the Middle East and Southeast Asia has given Ingrid a global perspective on health issues. Ingrid has a master's in public policy from Georgetown. And I had an opportunity to listen to both Ingrid and Shannon in a previous webcast on this very same topic, and amazing information. And we had well over 100 questions on the Q&A, and you guys handled a good number of them. So thank you again for that. And thank you so much for taking time out of an incredibly busy schedule to be here. So with that, Shannon, can we start with you and have you do an introduction and walk us through what this health order is?
Absolutely. I think actually Ingrid tends to walk through the slideshow, but let me give a brief intro if I can. First, I want to say also thank you, a special thank you to Andrea, who has really been a great partner in this work and a great partner for our South King County businesses in particular as we've been moving forward. And then to all of the stakeholders who have reached out, who have provided inputs and asked really good questions. And I just want to say these kind of webinars are really pivotal to us having a successful implementation of the vaccine verification program, and to just keep our residents as healthy as we can and to keep our businesses as thriving as we can. So I just super appreciate everyone being in this space, and also a shout out to my colleague Ingrid and to her partners in public health who have been doing outstanding work as we've moved forward. I want to highlight and just acknowledge that hotels are kind of a special niche here. And so I think this is going to be a particularly useful time for us to really go through some of these questions and provide some clarity in these spaces. So thank you. So first, I see we have the health officer order up, and the broad array here is that it is for public events over 500 people, outdoors, indoor, recreational establishments, gyms, restaurants, and bars. All of those locations do need to have customers show proof of vaccination or a negative test within 70, that is a test that was taken within 72 hours of their arrival at a location. That test cannot be an at-home rapid test. It has to be from a third-party verifier, a pharmacy, or a PCR test from a testing site. And then Ingrid, I think if this is the slideshow, do you want to kind of walk us through?
Sure, happy to. So I thank you, and thanks to all of you. I know this has just been, the last year and a half has been such a hard time for everyone in our community, across our country and across the globe on so many levels. Due to the continued high rate of community transmission of COVID-19 and the continued high rate of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in King County, as well as the hospital capacity crisis that we are facing in King County, our local health officer, standing in alliance with our mayor, Jenny Durkin of Seattle, and executive Dow Constantine in King County, on September 16th, announced this vaccine verification policy that we're talking with you about today. And these types of policies have been adopted not only in King County, but across other major metropolitan areas and jurisdictions across the country and other areas of the globe. So it was announced on September 16th, allowing for a ramp-up time for businesses and covered establishments to prepare, and for individual residents of our county to prepare to be ready to show their vaccination status. So as Shannon mentioned, starting October 25th, customers or patrons will be required to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination, having completed the series, and also 2 weeks after that to develop full immunity, or a negative test to enter outdoor events with 500 or more people, very large events like our sporting events. Our sports stadiums have already voluntarily adopted this policy. Secondly, indoor recreational events or establishment where we see a high risk for COVID transmission, including professional and collegiate sports that happen indoors, entertainment and performing arts centers, theaters, live music, gyms, and conferences. And finally, restaurants and bars that include indoor dining. So these are the covered entities that our health officer is requesting that people check their vaccination status or show a negative test before they enter. Next slide. This is just a pictorial to summarize, and we're working very hard in King County to issue our communications in very plain language, make it easy for people to understand. This is what is covered. At this point, I want to speak directly to hotels, and this might preempt some questions that many of you may have. Overall, hotels, vaccine verification is not required for normal hotel business, such as checking in guests or patrons who are there to stay at the hotel, or for people who enter your hotel for a quick or limited purpose. You would not be required to check vaccination status or ask for a negative or proof of negative test. However, as we said before, restaurants are covered. So if there is many hotels have a restaurant on site with its own entrance and indoor dining, vaccination verification would be required for those restaurants, just as it's required for other restaurants in the community. If a hotel is hosting a public event, such as a concert, vaccine verification is also required, or a conference involving people from the public or multiple businesses. Vaccine verification would be required. If a hotel is hosting a private event, such as a wedding, vaccine verification would also be required. Gyms located in the hotel, it's kind of a gray area, so we want to point this out. If the gym is solely for the use by the hotel guests, vaccine verification would not be required for guests to go use your in-house gym. However, if there's a gym that is also open to community membership, it would be treated by the order the same way that other gyms in community are treated, and they are entities that are required to check for vaccine or proof of negative test. Business meetings from one business, someone wants to rent out a room in the hotel or space to hold a business meeting or a workshop from a single business, not covered. Businesses generally have their own protocols for vaccine verification for their employees, so it would be duplicative. This is a little complex on how this order impacts this industry of the hotels, so we wanted to spell it out. Happy to go back to re-answer any questions on what we just described, and we plan to post a FAQ on the topic of hotels for your industry on our website. And next slide. The order built in a little longer ramp up time to prepare for implementation for very small restaurants. So they have until December 6th rather than October 25th to prepare to check for vaccine status. That would include restaurants and bars with seating capacity of 12 or less. And some of these smaller venues may exist in hotel spaces. Next slide. In terms of what can people show to prove their vaccination status, the intent is to make this as flexible as possible. So individuals can prove their vaccine status by simply showing their CDC hard copy card or from any other type of documentation from their medical record or vaccine provider. Proof of vaccination from another state or country will be accepted as long as it's a vaccine that's approved by the FDA or the WHO, as well as the mobile apps or digital vaccine card. And the state of Washington has adopted a digital vaccine card system called MyIR. And we have information available to the public on how to locate anyone who's been vaccinated in the state of Washington will appear in that database and will be able to provide their vaccination status and also a QR code issued by MyIR Mobile. And there are also other digital vaccine card systems in place. Next slide. Oh, that is more information about MyIR, how to get to that website. It's where the state of Washington has all the records of people who have been vaccinated in Washington. And finally, okay, so the other option that it was built into this order, and it is more flexible than other vaccine verification policies in other parts of the country, in that people have the choice of either showing proof of vaccination status or proof of negative test within the last 72 hours. We're primarily talking there about a PCR test, which all of the community testing sites, that's what they do. A negative rapid test result is only accepted if it was completed on site or comes with official documentation from a testing provider, not just a rapid test that someone bought in a pharmacy and completed in the privacy of their home. And next slide. That's it. So there's a ton of information on the Public Health Seattle-King County website about this policy, including, as I said, an FAQ. And we're going to recommend back to our communication staff to add an FAQ regarding hotel spaces and how they are treated. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Shannon, do you have other things, or are we ready to just dive right into the Q&A?
I think we can dive right in, and actually, as Ingrid said, this will be incredibly helpful because we do want to add this special section related to hotels on the website. So you all are helping us, frankly, to create that section by providing us the questions that we may not have received yet. So we're happy. Q&A is frankly the most important thing we can do just to try to provide some clarity for different scenarios. So we're happy to jump right in.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to also ask Mark Everton from the Seattle Southside Regional Tourism Authority to join us for the panel for the Q&A as well. As Mark, I know you have been a hotel operator in the past. And so if you wouldn't mind also just helping answer questions or helping facilitate the Q&A to help me if I miss something. So thank you for being here. Teamwork makes the dream work. And perfect. So just diving right in, a couple questions about swimming pools. You mentioned gyms. If the swimming pool is only available to guests that are staying, can you confirm then that there would not need to be a verification process for guests to swim in the pool?
That is correct. The same would apply for the pool as does the fitness center. If it's not open to the public or community, but is for guests only, then it is not required.
Perfect, great. Can you talk a little bit about the requirement for employees? Is there a requirement for employees?
At this time, there is not, under the King County Health Order, there is not a requirement for employees. That is covered under Labor and Industries. And we also know with the Biden order coming through, there are just some challenges there with clarity for employees. So we're having them work that through the COVID protocols that are presented from the state side. Obviously, we strongly encourage all employees to be vaccinated as well. And certainly that doesn't preclude a business from requiring their employees to be vaccinated. So I know in some cases, there are certainly businesses requiring that, and we support that action if businesses are wanting to take that action.
If I could jump in with a question, because there's a whole handful of questions that all revolve around the same aspect. And so let me lay it out for you. Quite a few of our hotels provide breakfast, but the breakfast is not, it's a part of the room, or it's at the breakfast room, but it's not quote unquote a restaurant. And so the hotels are asking if it's only hotel guests and they're getting their free continental breakfast or their made to order breakfast, is that requiring a vaccination? And the second aspect of that is some of the hoteliers are saying that there's some nuance in the order that said that places that aren't normally a grocery store that serves food isn't considered a restaurant. And they're saying that a hotel that's serving food falls into that same category. So could you address this breakfast room nuance?
So I'm happy to take first shot, Ingrid, if you would like, and then we can.
Yeah.
This is a great example of where hotels fall into a bit of a gray area as it comes to the order. So the example that Ingrid gave in her presentation of a restaurant within a hotel. So there are certainly hotels that have restaurants attached to them. The restaurant of the hotel is absolutely under the order. Now, if you are serving breakfast in a space where somebody can come into the lounge, grab some muffins, maybe they sit down in a lounge chair, but it's not specifically part of the restaurant, or maybe they take it back to their room, that area is not covered under the vaccine verification order. So it really does depend on, frankly, where that breakfast buffet takes place. So I know, for example, I've stayed in an Embassy Suites before with my kids, which I had loved because they had like a free buffet breakfast downstairs, but the buffet breakfast was in the restaurant space. So that would apply because it's a part of the restaurant space and they're sitting down and staying in the restaurant. But if it is outside of that restaurant space and in a lounge area or in the rooms, it would not, unless Ingrid tells me otherwise.
No, totally agree with your answer, Shannon. And the language in the order that I think folks are looking at it reads like this. It says indoor dining in other buildings that primarily serve non-dining purposes, such as a mall, food court, or school or employee cafeteria. The order does not apply to. So in this case, the hotel space that is primarily the use of the space is as a hotel. But if you have a small area that's for breakfast for your customers, we would consider that exempt, distinct from a full-scale restaurant that serves the public that is embedded within the space but is open to the public. I know that is confusing, but I hope that answered the question.
No, I think that does. And like Mark said, there's quite a few of those, just trying to clarify that nuance of there's the complimentary breakfast and where those lines are. And just another subtle nuance to that same question, there might not be a hotel restaurant that's a full restaurant, but there might be a bar or a lounge, right, that will serve, drinks and appetizers. Would that apply, right? So that it's not necessarily, full service dining, but there is a lobby bar and there are, snacks and appetizers, those types of things.
I think that the qualifier that you should apply to all these questions is it open to the public and not just to the hotel guests? And that would be the criteria, because we'd be just as concerned about COVID transmission in a bar and a hotel as we would about any other bar or tavern, and all bars and taverns are covered. So a bar that is visited by both hotel members and members of the community should be checking for vaccination status.
Perfect. And that would be the trigger. The trigger would be, is this something that's open only to a guest? If it's only open to a guest, then there would not be a trigger. If it's open to somebody who could walk off the street, then that's when that trigger would happen.
Correct.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. More questions about meetings. So if a single business is hosting a meeting in a hotel meeting space, would they need to verify vaccination for those, for that business meeting taking place?
So I think, and this is a great question. Generally speaking, we are thinking of conferences, for example, and conventions as spaces where more than people from more than one business come to gather. So if there is a space where, like, the Southside Chamber has decided, 4 of their members are going to go and use a meeting space in a hotel room, that would not necessarily be covered under this order, because it is a single business sort of small group meeting in that space. But the concept being, if it's a conference and you're bringing in people from a variety of places, or I would argue if it's like a conference and you're hosting 400 people in that conference, it would be certainly, I would say that would be wise to use the vaccine verification requirement, because again, that is a larger event rather than a small meeting. And so it is a little bit in how folks are choosing to sort of define those terms. But I think it's the difference between a meeting and an event in that case.
Okay, great, thank you. And here's another clarification on the hotel bar idea is, if a hotel says that it is only open to hotel guests, maybe before COVID, they would let somebody walk in off the street and order a cocktail, but because of the vaccine mandate, they want to just, tighten it up a little bit and say the hotel bar is only open, to guests. Would they then not have to get into the vaccine status?
I would say correct. And it meets what the language in the order, which says that the order does not apply to indoor dining or drinking, for that matter, in other buildings that primarily serve non-dining/drinking purposes, which is a hotel.
Perfect. Great. Question clarifying events with less than 500 people. And I think this is what you were saying, Shannon, is when you have more than, when you have 459 people, it would still be considered more of a conference. Would the vaccine verification apply?
The 500 person thing is about outdoor events. So 500 is the threshold for outdoor events to require vaccine verification. For an indoor event that is like a conference or large meeting event, it can be smaller than that 500, and it's still considered an event, basically, an event being held in indoor space. So it would be required. If it was 459 people inside of a hotel or like a conference style meeting, that would be covered under the order.
There's a couple of questions that are related regarding the vaccination card, and if we could touch base a little bit on that. The first has to do with identification. The order doesn't require somebody to show a driver's license or identification along with the card. If you could touch base on that. Secondarily, will proof of having COVID or proof of antibodies, do you believe that will become proof at some point when it isn't currently covered in the order?
Ingrid, do you want to?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So yes, it's true that our order in King County, unlike many other vaccine policies around the country, does not require someone to simultaneously show their proof of vaccine card and their proof of identity by showing a driver's license or equivalent document. That is intentional. The reason behind that is really equity concerns. with the traumatizing impact for some populations, including those who are undocumented or those who have a history of being in this country and other countries of authoritarian rule, and sort of the trauma of being constantly asked to show your identification. So our elected leaders and our health officer acknowledge there will be some level of fraud that could occur of someone using someone else's vaccine card, and that felt more acceptable than the widespread concern about the trauma that constantly requesting people to show ID could cause in community. So that's the answer to that question. Your other question, okay, remind me of your other question.
Antibodies.
Yeah. Thank you. It is true that people who have had and recovered from COVID have antibodies and are at lower risk of transmitting or a lower transmission risk. However, from an operational perspective, it would be very cumbersome and difficult to train people who work at events and restaurants to witness proof of former COVID infection, as well as the time period necessary post-infection to have developed immunity and no longer be infectious. Operationally, it really didn't feel like that would work for this purpose. It could be something that could be added later on, but we honestly don't anticipate that this order will have longevity as higher and higher percentage of our population in King County is vaccinated. We're really proud of leading the country on our vaccination rate overall. So this order will be revisited certainly before even 3 and 6 months into implementation to assess if this layer of protection continues to be necessary. We have less than 280,000 people remaining in King County who are not yet vaccinated. That's a very small population compared to the population at large. Our biggest risk really, and this really impacts you as in your industry, are people traveling from other parts of Washington State or other parts of the US or internationally. We have a lot of people coming in unvaccinated from those other areas, and that is a concern. And just always a reminder that private businesses can voluntarily adopt the protocol they think is best that is even stricter than this. For example, hotels could choose to do vaccine verification for their hotel guests, and I know some in the industry have.
And I'd just like to clarify the number that Ingrid shared of those who are not yet vaccinated is those who are eligible for vaccination. So that does not include our 0 to age 12 individuals. And so that is a big part of also who we're trying to protect here is the realities of that there are people in our population not able to get vaccinated yet. So that's a bit of a larger number.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of questions just about the numbers of people. And I think that could be kind of confusing because we said, okay, if it's 500 and it's outdoors, you're right, then that's when the proof of vaccination happens. But people are really searching for that number for indoor events. There's if the bar has 12 stools, then you need to, do the proof of vaccination. Can you just be very clear and concise with if an event or a meeting is happening inside, then you need to get the proof of vaccination, correct? Any event or any meeting that's happening indoors. I think it's what's hard as a hotel operator or a venue is that that squishy space of, oh, well, if it's small and it's just one business, one business could have, 600 people, right? Mm-hmm. So what is that threshold for determining the indoor event?
Thank you, Andrea. I mean, here's what I would say, and I'm certainly interested in what folks here think about this. We are trying to provide flexibility for operational realities, right? And so some of that is where the small meeting, one business, because of the way the venue is set up, we feel could be outside of this order. If it is easier for the industry to have us make it like any event held in a conference room is covered under this order, we could certainly talk about that and what that looks like. This is a space that, again, the challenge between like meeting, conference, event, convention, right? The presumption is an event or a convention, it tends to be larger, tends to have a mingling of people from different spaces. So you wouldn't necessarily know somebody's vaccine verification in the day-to-day. And so that's sort of how we were trying to draw this line. Ingrid, I don't know if you have any feedback on that specific related to the meeting from a single business versus others. But if that is a place where it is easier on the industry to have us as King County provide more clarity by just sort of declaring it anything inside of a conference room, that is certainly something that we could do.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And so just to re-say the numbers issue. So for vaccine verification for outdoor events, the threshold is 500 participants and above. For indoor recreational events or establishments, there is no threshold of the number of people. All of those that fall under the order are you're required to check vaccine. The only difference is that the acknowledgement that very small businesses, small restaurants and bars, less than 12 people, have a little bit longer ramp time to prepare for implementation. But any covered activity in an indoor space that we've been discussing that falls within the order, there is no limit on the number of people that indicates whether it's covered under the order, because we know that there's a transmission risk even with a small handful of people coming into the same tight indoor space.
But you clarified, just so it's clear to me, you clarified and said if it's an individual company and they're having a meeting, a training, a board meeting of their staff in a event space, a meeting room in a hotel, that it's not covered by the order.
Yes, Mark, and I would emphasize that there's an intent here to not be duplicative with other guidances. So
Right.
Many employers have protocols and guidance about vaccination for their employees. A lot of folks in Washington state, county workers, health and long-term care workers are all under a mandate to be vaccinated as a condition of employment. Under President Biden's announcement, businesses with 100 or more employees will also be under an employee mandate. So we didn't want to get into this place of duplication between vaccine mandates that have to do with vaccination as a condition of employment or internal protocols that companies have about vaccination status. So that's why, as Shannon is explaining, like you've got one employer coming in, they want to do a workshop. Their protocol around vaccination, it falls under a different silo, and it would be confusing to make put on top of that the vaccine verification requirement for a public space.
Okay, so let's just pause for a second and talk a little bit about enforcement and also about verification. So from a hotel standpoint, the hotel doesn't want to be the police officer at the door of the meeting room. The hotel wants to put in a contract that the company that's renting the meeting room and holding the meeting, event, conference, training, they must verify. So if the county were to come in, is the county going to, how is the enforcement? Is the county going to look to the hotel and say, show us who you have at the door? Or is the county going to say, show us the contract that you've instructed the client to verify and made it clear to the client what the expectations are?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for that question. So we are not requiring any businesses to track the verification, like to keep a recording of names of folks who have come in or any of that. If operationally, and this makes sense to me, you want the event that is taking place to be the ones attesting that, yes, they have checked vaccine verification for everyone coming to the event. As long as they attest to that and they are following that intent, that can work.
Good.
There are just spaces like, for example, a hotel restaurant, right? You would need somebody in the restaurant to be checking vaccine verification in that space. And for some hotel operations, maybe they just feel better being the ones to say, hey, we're going to need to see the vaccine verification for the folks that come in. We are trying to be as flexible as we can be related to what works operationally for those different spaces.
Great, thank you so much. And so again, confirming that who is responsible for confirming that that's flexible from the county's perspective, and that the venue can choose whether or not that's them and their staff, or whether they want to add that into their event contracts, to make sure that that's perfect. Thank you for that. Next questions are kind of surrounding quite a few about just what happens with de-escalation, right? You know, what happens when a patron refuses to show a test or show proof of vaccination? Are they supposed to turn people away? You know, what's the protocol? What's the recommendation from the county for just dealing with potentially some combative patrons?
So our goal at the county is, again, resident safety, health and safety, right? So we do not want people to get into combative situations if they can avoid it at all. We do recommend, and in our FAQs and in the toolkit that we're putting together, there will be some scenarios laid out that are similar to this, that sort of walk people through this. The best, what we recommend is trying to provide first, mitigation things. So for example, if somebody's trying to come into the restaurant, but there's an outdoor seating option, try to encourage them to sit outdoors. If they can do takeout, that's a better scenario. Just sort of trying to provide those alternatives for those individuals. If somebody is particularly really combative, I think that is similar to what you would see in any position where something like that were to happen. The recommendation would be to handle that in the safest way possible for your employees. And if that's a situation that you feel is going to be violent, obviously that's something where you'd want to pick up the phone and call local law enforcement. We hope that certainly those kinds of things don't need to happen. We would not, if a location is doing everything appropriate and is following the intent of the order to track vaccination verification and make sure folks have it, and they have somebody who they feel is going to be combative and problematic, and they need to let that person into a space in order to mitigate and then deal with the situation, we would not consider that as a violation of the order on behalf of that business, right? Like that's not something where we would be coming and wagging our finger at a business. Rather, we would use that as an education opportunity, to how can we better manage that kind of situation? What are some things we can do to help in that scenario? Those kind of things. So we're hoping those are few and far between, and we are doing what we can to provide that kind of information in our toolkit. And we'll have, I think, some other webinars that will address that more specifically. But generally speaking, that's the way we're hoping people can follow through on that. Is there anything to add there, Ingrid, from the community side as we've been having these conversations?
So we just acknowledge that this is challenging for you and your staff, and it will create a burden. And I think this is all about, as a community, stepping up so we can get the pandemic under control, remove these kinds of restrictions as soon as possible, and get back to normal life. I did put in the line to you, Andrea, the complaint line, both a website and a phone number. So if there are this is really, the enforcement is really on a trust-based system for establishments and events to comply with this order, as well as individuals to comply. We have set up a complaint line, and there will be enforcement of egregious non-compliance of this order, but we have very limited ability for enforcement. So it's really relying on, as a community, people stepping up to do everything all of us can do to reduce transmission and get the pandemic under control.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Another, definite, area of concern and lots of questions that people are having are with guests bringing food into the hotel, right? So lots of times guests will get takeout and then they'll come to the hotel and, want to eat the takeout in a lobby area or a common area. That wouldn't be applicable to at all, right? So that they could certainly do that. Yeah. Perfect. Mark, you want to take the next couple ones here?
Yeah, I did. And I just want to, because I'm still seeing a lot of questions come through on numbers. And I'm hoping we can just kind of take a deep breath and go back and make sure everybody's back on the same page with it, because there's some confusion. The important that I think the important thing that everybody needs to realize is this order is not the same type of order that we had a year ago that said you cannot have meetings. This order is saying, yes, you can have meetings, but you need to do a verification for your meeting. And what you said earlier is an indoor event meeting function of any size needs to have vaccination cards. There is a little gray area where you're saying if everybody knows each other and they're already working for the same employer, they don't necessarily need to be vaccinated. So the rule of thumb for hotels should be require there to be vaccinations for every event and require the client who's booking the space to be responsible for checking vaccinations, and let them know that if everybody's got the same employer, the same W-2, they don't need to do that. But short of that, they will need to do it. So it doesn't matter if it's more than 50 or if it's half the capacity of the room or if it's open to the public or not open to the public. The basic bottom line rule is an event held in a hotel is going to require, under the order, is going to require vaccination verifications. And that responsibility should be put on the client, and it should be done via contract. And then the events can go on. Have I summarized that correctly?
Yes, thank you, Mark. We're going to steal that same W-2 talking point as well. That's helpful.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, very clear, Mark. Thank you
Yes.
so much. And you are so right to point out the confusion that may be happening with previous capacity restrictions. Those are no longer in place, and this is separate. So
Right.
thank you.
And when I go over, as an example, when I go across the street to the Marriott has a full service restaurant and bar that's open breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Those bars and the restaurant require a vaccination card be shown, and it should be monitored by the hotel employee as they let people in. That Marriott also has a concierge room or lounge that they do continental breakfast for hotel guests. That doesn't necessarily require a vaccination card because they're all hotel guests. It's not open to the public and nobody's buying food in that venue. So there's the distinction between. And on our limited and economy service hotels that have a little nook that serves breakfast or has a coffee bar or a waffle maker, and it's only hotel guests that are there, they don't need to check it. But if it's a restaurant that's taking vouchers for a free breakfast, it's an open restaurant, open to the public, and will be requiring that whether they're hotel guests or not, right? So I hope that
Yes.
if I'm accurate, I hope that helps clarify a whole bunch of these questions. Okay.
Very much so. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot in there about that. Absolutely, Mark. I appreciate that. And a similar question, just in terms of at what point.
Ingrid's raising her hand.
Oh, sorry, Ingrid. Go
I
ahead.
apologize. I need to leave to
All
my
right.
next meeting, but thank you so much. And Mark, thank you for your communicating this so clearly. We really appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
And we'll save all of these Q&As for you guys to pick out which ones you want to specifically address, because I think there's some really good questions for
Perfect.
your.
Great.
for
And I
your
can stay for a
FAQ.
bit. Ingrid
Okay.
needs to head
Thank
to a
you.
meeting, but I can stay for the remainder.
Perfect. Yeah, because we have until 2:30. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Again, it's the mechanism, right? For if the even if the restaurant or the bar or the lounge area, it might be open to the public, but there's not a separate entrance. And so trying to sort through, when would be a good place for the hotel operator of the restaurant or the bar or the lounge, then ask for that verification. If they don't technically have to do it when they check in, but they do technically have to do it when they go to have a drink at the bar, where would you recommend that take place?
I mean, from my perspective, that could take place at the bar. For example, a bartender could say, could I see your vaccine verification in that space? If that is the bar where the public can also enter type engagement. That's what I understand from folks would probably be easier, is having the server be in that role rather than having a person, for example, standing outside the bar checking. Again, it kind of depends operationally on what really works best in a particular hotel or restaurant setting. So.
Right. So at the point where they're then being seated, because technically that, I guess that could be someone from the outside, or it could be the patron staying at the hotel. Perfect. All right. Next question. Can you talk a little bit about how the mask mandate fits in? There still is a mask mandate, even with the vaccine mandate, indoor events, employees and patrons still would need to wear a mask regardless of vaccination status, correct?
Yes, that is still in place. And I will say there are conversations happening about how long that would still need to be in place as we're getting our vaccine verification order underway. But currently, that is still in place, and we'll certainly keep folks posted if that is looking to change.
Perfect. Awesome. Mark, you see any other ones in there we really need to get to? We've got 12 minutes left. And as you said, that we'll get what we don't answer live today, we'll get answers to people later.
Two things have popped up. One, if you could pull out your crystal ball, Shannon, because it's been so accurate for the last 18 months. How long do you think this order will be in place? And then secondarily, can you also touch base on where we are with masks and what the mask mandate is and how masks are still required indoors? And clarify for everybody that this vaccination card verification doesn't alleviate the need for masks. It simply is an additional order. Could you touch base on those two things?
Yes, thanks, Mark. So first of all, there are a couple of different mask mandates. The state has a mask mandate that is in place right now, as well as then different jurisdictions have different mandates. But the state actually also has an indoor mask mandate. And so we continue to be in conversations with the state and with our own public health folks about how long we need both of these measures of safety in place. So if we have vaccine verification and we are underway, when do we look at that and say, okay, do we need to keep the mask mandate in place for those areas where we also have vaccine verification? So we are having that conversation. I can't crystal ball you where that will land, but we really are following the science. We follow the direction of Dr. Duchin and his colleagues, and I know they are having these conversations. The vaccine verification, the mask order, these are things we consider layers of the protection that we use in the midst of this pandemic. But as you've all seen through this time, we do evolve and learn about new ways that we can interact here. So I would say it's safe to say this is an ongoing conversation, but for now, yes, we are continuing to follow the mask mandates in place.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Can we also talk about signage and kind of best practices?
Yeah, I wanted to answer that because there's a couple of questions that there will be signage in the toolkit, right? So signage will be available in the toolkit, which will be clear and hopefully helpful. Absolutely.
And I believe businesses are actually under the order required to have a sign up that says that they're part of the King County order. And that is all in the toolkit and the verification toolkit that is available. And we are right now in the process of making those signs available in a variety of languages and determining the best ways to get the signage out to all of our community businesses. So that is something that's happening right now with our partnership with the Seattle Metro Chamber, and then public health with our partnerships with CBOs, community-based organizations and others to make sure we're getting it out widely.
A couple questions about how people are accessing the toolkit. Again, on our website, we have information. There's going to be another webinar tomorrow that's just on the toolkit that Seattle Metro is hosting in partnership, and there's a website to access that as well. So I'm going to ask my staff, Sammy, if she could find the website for the toolkit and put that into the chat. And then also the link for the webinar tomorrow that will be focused exclusively on the toolkit. Those resources are forthcoming. Mark, what else do you see? We've got 8 minutes left.
Yeah, there's a little bit of confusion, and we need some clarity on the test results. And right, so I take a test, I check into a hotel 2 days later, I've got a negative test. So the hotel isn't going to ask me for it to check in because that's a normal course of business. But after I drop my bags in my room, I go to the bar to watch the Giants-Dodger game. And as I do, the bartender is going to ask me for my Vax card or my proof. And I show it to them, all's good. The next morning, I go to the restaurant to have breakfast, but it's now been more than 3 days since I got my test done. So, but I'm going to stay in the hotel for another week. So am I prohibited from having breakfast in the restaurant the next morning because I don't have a 72-hour window test result? So it was okay for beer and pizza last night, but it's not okay for breakfast this morning. That's your understanding.
Technically,
correct?
that is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that is the one of the questions that we are actually still waiting for some direction from Dr. Duchin on is for multi-day, like convention, like if somebody's in a hotel for an entire week, how do we manage that test opt-out in that situation? I believe the answer is going to be they'll need a test 72 hours. But Dr. Duchin is actually, that's one of the outstanding things we have in front of him right now to get confirmation on.
Okay, I understand the order and I understand the application of it. It's going to be difficult because somebody's going to have to be stair stepping that's in the hotel for a week is going to have to be stair stepping tests and being trying to keep track of when it's expiring and when they're going to get their new test results back. So it's
no, we appreciate that challenge. And that is one of the reasons it's a bit of an outstanding question with our public health officer.
Okay.
Question about outdoor events and just, tented, outdoor seating areas. Again, confirming that if it's an event and it's outdoors and it's less than 500 people, then it would not apply, then the order would not apply, correct?
Yeah, now technically speaking, it does kind of depend on the tent. If a tent is a fully enclosed tent and it's a large event like that, it would technically under our public health guidelines, because it wouldn't have ventilation, like that open ventilation with at least 3 sides open, really be like an indoor space. That one, again, is a little bit of a gray area in that way, except we do have a definition. We do actually have a definition about 3 open sides to be considered an outdoor thing. So it could be canopied, right? But fully tented is a bit of a different animal because that makes it basically indoors.
Great. As a comment, kind of in a question, would it be possible to update the order? So rather than the 72-hour testing, we say 3 days, similar to flights and international flights. So comment just about hours versus days.
Hear that? That's very good feedback. Thank you. The intent really is 3 days. And so I see what you're driving at there. That's a good clarity. And it may be something that if we don't have to update the order, we may just make that clear in the FAQs ahead of time rather than and wait and see if we have other technical updates to the order as well. But I appreciate that feedback. That's good feedback.
And another
again,
hotel,
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Another hotel brought up the issue that if we're going to make it clear to the client in a hotel perspective that all of their attendees will need to show proof of vaccination, but that's also going to include any third parties they bring in, DJs, photographers, florists, other people that are coming into the function or working the function that are not hotel employees. And that's where it gets to be a little confusing. That hotel employees at this point are not being required to have vaccination proof, correct? But will be covered in a later order or Biden's order. Is that, did I get that right?
Well, Biden's order covers employers who have 100 employees or more.
Okay.
And so that is where that space is covered. So many hotels would be, I think, covered in that, but some would not.
Correct.
I'll clarify, you provided 2 examples there. One was a DJ and one was a florist. So the DJ who would be working the event and be in the event at the same time as the event was taking place would be in that space. The florist actually is somebody who's coming in, setting up, walking out. That person, vendors, delivery folks, people picking up takeout, that kind of thing are not required to show their vaccination.
Okay.
Fantastic. Another just question on record keeping and attestation, right? So here's a scenario where a hotel hosts a meeting for a business, there's 300 people that are all W-2 employees of that one business, are subject to Biden's, 100 employees or more, vaccination is required. Does the hotel need to keep anything on record to say that, that they were all vaccinated? If there was an outbreak of some kind, is there any repercussions, for that property owner?
So no, we don't require the hotel to keep that record. I think realistically, obviously, a hotel would have those records of at least who the employer was. If there was some sort of outbreak, there would be an ability to communicate with the appropriate people and do some of that to make sure that we were, contact tracing or providing that information to those folks, so that, we would want to certainly follow through. Public health would recommend that the hotel and the business follow through with that should there be an outbreak in that kind of setting. But there is not a requirement on the hotel to track those individuals that are a part of that meeting.
I think it's an important point right now, Shannon, because you brought this up in the last one of these that we went through, that it's really important for all of us as business owners and people in the community to take responsibility and to follow the order to the best of our ability. But the health department doesn't have hundreds of stormtroopers that are going to be checking and enforcing. And so it is not, we as business people need to take responsibility and make sure that we're doing this for our own health and safety and the safety and health of our industry, but not necessarily be constantly looking over our shoulder and wondering, oh, is that nondescript car the health department showing up to check on our function? Because that's probably not going to be happening at this point, correct?
I appreciate that, Mark. Yes, absolutely. As I said earlier as well, like our goal is education and keeping our communities safe and keeping our businesses and our hotels open and able to do their normal lines of business. So we are presuming good intent on the part of our businesses to follow the order, should they fall under the order. That is our first place of assumption, right? And so we're trying to provide the tools and the resources to make that happen. If we do get complaints, like for example, if we get calls that there is one restaurant somewhere that, isn't checking any vaccine verification and a patron has gone there and they feel unsafe, and we hear that from a few different people about the same restaurant, we will reach out to that restaurant and be like, hey, what do you need from us to be able to follow this order? Like, are you aware of the order? Have you, that's really going to be the steps that we take. So no, we are not. I think public health would definitely frown on stormtrooper uniforms, and that is not the way we are approaching it. And we also appreciate these opportunities to create these scenarios and sort of talk it out, because we do consider all of you partners as we're moving forward. And this has been, I will just have to say, incredibly helpful for us as well, as we're able to inform and educate ourselves, as well as the partners we're working with, to make sure we're following the intent of the order.
Perfect. Great. And we are out of time, and we clearly still have, over 40 questions. So again, another over 100 questions. We answered over 60 of them, but we will do our best to get those to you, Shannon, your team, so we can be more specific. We'll, update the FAQs and get that information out to everyone. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Mark, the Seattle Southside Regional Tourism Authority, to you, Shannon and Ingrid, for helping, and of course to all of our partners who we've been working with tirelessly to help support our business community since March of 2020, and we'll continue to do all we can to make sure that you have the tools and the resources you need to keep your employees and your customers safe. Again, just really appreciate you being here. Please stay healthy, please stay safe, and do reach out to us with any other questions or concerns, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate seeing you again. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Andrea.
Thank
Take
you.
care.